Welcome back. Well, it has been 5 weeks now since a new Prime Minister came to power in Pakistan, and as we've seen, Yusuf Raza Gilani and the MPs who've elected him have already set about reversing some of the policies President Musharraf did have in place. He ordered judges arrested by President Musharraf under emergency law to be released, and after that he pledged to pursue a resolution calling for a UN investigation into the assassination of former Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto. And now the coalition government pursuing negotiations with tribal groups Musharraf had previously dealt with militarily. Well, it's that move causing Afghanistan and the US some concern. They worry that abandoning Musharraf's hardline approach to tribal leaders could allow al-Qaeda and the Taliban to regroup and become stronger. Still with us, our guests in Lahore, Jalil Afridi; in Washington, D.C., Shuja Nawaz; and in Philadelphia, Bill Roggio. Gentlemen, thanks for staying with us. I'm going to go straight back to Lahore and speak to Jalil Afridi there. We mentioned the US and Afghanistan there. I want to ask you about Afghanistan. Where does Afghanistan fit into the picture of these talks here? And is there a risk to Hamid Karzai and the Afghan parliament in the Afghan country by these talks happening?
Well, I'm really sorry, but first I want to, answer a few things which Bill had stated earlier, because it's very important. You know, it's now been 7 years that the American forces are in Afghanistan. And yesterday we saw the kind of attack which took place on Hamid Karzai. So it's not like due to the American invasion things have settled down in Afghanistan or things have improved in Afghanistan. We can also see that the opium production in Afghanistan has increased by God knows how many times. And one wonders that in the presence of NATO forces and in the presence of US troops, how come the opium growth has increased so much? So to Mr. Bill, a few things which Mr. Bill said, I want to clear it up. The tribal people have been living under this law which is called the Frontier Crime Regulation, which Kamal mentioned earlier, which this new government wished to changes. So after this thing, the people will be living a different kind of life. Second thing is that the people of the tribal area, which Bill stated that, Pakistan is making a big blunder by, I really do not think this. I really don't think it is that bad, because the gentleman talking to you right now in front of you is from tribal area. He came to America and studied with Americans. And so the people of the tribal area are not really that crazy people. They know what's good. So, people like my parents sent me to America to get good education. Now it's duty of people like me to tell Bill that it's really not that bad. It's really not that bad that poor students of madrasa, young boys of madrasa should be killed while looking for some fugitives which the Americans wish to find. And the technology that we have now, I think it would be true to say that we are living in a fool's paradise if we really think that people in the tribal area would be planning to bomb places in Philadelphia or in New Orleans or in Malibu.
Okay, then, so let's put some of this to Bill Roggio then. Let's put some of this to him and let him have a right of reply. What do you think, Bill?
One last thing I want to ask Bill,
hold on a moment for me, please, if you wouldn't mind, Mr. Afridi.
In one school in America, he killed so many poor students.
Okay, Mr. Afridi, I'd like to let Bill Roggio have a say here, please. If you wouldn't mind,
I would also like to tell Bill to please come to Pakistan. I would like to take him to my tribal area, Khyber Agency,
Mr. Afridi, let's let him speak then, please, if you wouldn't mind.
Please.
Yeah, yes, I am by no means sitting here saying that all of the people that live in the tribal areas are terrorists. No one believes this. But what we do know is that there is a very hardcore Taliban element that supports members of al-Qaeda that don't just attack American troops in Afghanistan. They attack the Pakistani people. Just prior to the elections, 2 major suicide bombing attacks against the Awami National Party, a local Pashtun political party. Dozens, scores of attacks against the Pakistani people in Lahore and Islamabad. You cannot deny these attacks took place throughout Afghanistan. You know, I am not concerned. I am very concerned for the welfare of the Pakistani people in this case.
And American troops have been there now for 7 years. Has it brought any fruits? Has it done any good?
Well, because one problem is that there has been a safe haven for the Taliban and al-Qaeda in the Northwest Frontier Province and in regions in Baluchistan. The Taliban Shura is known to be operating from Quetta, and the Pakistani government, I disagree that Musharraf has taken a hardline approach.
Gentlemen, I'm going to interrupt here.
Musharraf has taken a schizophrenic approach on this.
I feel we could have a proper discussion just between the two of you, actually. I'd like to bring this back onto some other issues because, Bill, while I've got you, I just want to perhaps not get so much your opinion, but if you can explain to me the US stance on things at the moment, because I've seen two things. I've seen the Assistant Secretary of State, Richard Boucher, say that you have to talk to these people. He seems quite open to it. I've heard Dana Perino, the White House spokesman, saying these types of approaches don't work. We don't think they work. What is the real US approach to this, do you think?
I think the real U.S. approach to this is that they are very concerned that this doesn't work. I think the State Department is attempting to put a best face on this to work within the confines of a new Pakistani government, and they're crossing their fingers that the approach of negotiating with the Taliban is going to bear fruit. But when I do believe that they believe it will not work.
OK, let's bring in Shuja Nawaz again in Washington, D.C. We haven't heard from him in this half of the programme. I want to perhaps put some of those ideas about Afghanistan, which I mentioned a little earlier, to you. The risk, is there a risk for Afghanistan? With these talks happening between Pakistan, Taliban and the Pakistan government, is there a risk for Afghanistan as the neighbour and, I guess, the threat of al-Qaeda elements moving further into Afghanistan from Pakistan?
Well, that risk is always there, and that risk, in fact, has existed ever since the United States invaded Afghanistan to remove the Taliban, because the U.S. basically did not devote enough energy and troops to Afghanistan for its military purposes. Even today, with NATO, you have barely 40,000 people in all, and most of them that are active, particularly in the border area, are U.S. troops. Most of the other NATO forces are not operational, are not going on forward patrols, are not actively pursuing or trying to shut down the border routes. And it's a 1,500-kilometer border, which is very hard to seal off from only one side. You know, if you have a hammer and anvil approach, you need both the hammer and the anvil. And the U.S., by shifting its focus to Iraq, unfortunately allowed that ingress to the Taliban from Pakistan. And of course, I agree that when the first deal was made in 2006, the Taliban took that opportunity to regroup and to set up new training camps and perhaps better prepare themselves for attacking U.S. forces in Afghanistan.
Do you think, though, just briefly, sorry to interrupt you, that perhaps, and maybe I'm pushing a little bit here, but maybe that Hamid Karzai and the Afghan government could learn something from the approach that the Pakistani government is taking now, that there is something to be learned from this?
I think the approach shouldn't simply be talking to the Taliban representative, although they are a part of the Pashtun population and we have to recognize them as such on both sides of the border. But it should also include the other tribal maliks. In the Pakistan side, unfortunately, because of the earlier military actions that eviscerated the tribal Malik system and the political agents that were operating in the area, there was really no one to talk to. And now the government will have to rebuild those relationships so that you can bring in these people in order to isolate the troublemakers, which are primarily the foreign elements on the one hand, primarily Uzbeks who've been escaping from repression in their own country. There are almost no Chechens in the area, according to my information, and there are very few Arabs because their ingress has been controlled. So you have to have a completely new approach, while at the same time looking at the economic and social development, which will take a lot of time. It's not something that can be done overnight, although the U.S. would want it to be done overnight. We've already got over 100,000 Pakistani troops there, and it has not worked.
Well, I'm sorry to say, after a very lively discussion, we have run out of time here on Inside Story. But my thanks to our guests, Jalil Afridi in Lahore, Bill Roggio in Philadelphia, and Shuja Nawaz there in Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining us, and thank you so much for joining us here for this edition of Inside Story. We always welcome your comments and your suggestions. InsideStory at AlJazeera.net. From the whole team, goodbye for now.